Chapter 1: The Proposal That Lied. If you could go back to the moment he said forever knowing what came after, would you still say yes? My name is Lila Carter, and I used to believe that love could make sense of everything, but forever turned out to have fine print. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's about discovery the moment you realize the person beside you has already left, even while they're still smiling at you. The night he proposed still lives inside my memory like a film I never turned off. The air was soft that evening spring, lingering somewhere between warm and cool, the city humming with that promise only April seems to hold. We were on the rooftop of a restaurant in downtown Seattle, fairy lights stretched above us, the skyline glittering against a navy sky. He had chosen that spot because it overlooked the water, and he knew I loved the way light dances on it at night. He knelt in front of me, the sound of his knees brushing the concrete, a small velvet box in his hand. For a moment the world around us blurred, and it was only his eyes and that ring catching every reflection from the city below. He said my name once softly, as if trying it on for the last time before changing what it meant forever. When he asked me to marry him, his voice trembled just enough to make me believe that underneath all the confidence lived sincerity. I said yes. The crowd on the terrace clapped, strangers raising their glasses toward us. I remember laughter, the taste of champagne that cost more than my rent at the time, the way he held his glass a little higher like a man toasting his own story. His name was Ryan Bennett, 34 financial consultant, proud of the fact that he could quote market trends faster than he could apologize. I was 28, a jewelry designer running a small boutique called Carter & Bloom in Pioneer Square. To me, the proposal felt like a full circle, love and work, stability and creativity finally meeting at the same table. In the weeks that followed, we lived inside that yes. We retold the story again and again, rehearsing our happiness until it sounded rehearsed. My mother cried when she saw the ring. My best friend said he looked at me the way good men do in old movies. I wanted to believe her. For a while, life felt easy. The shop was busy, my designs sold faster than I could restock them, and Ryan talked about merging our accounts about investments and homes with yards. He had that kind of certainty that made you want to follow. But certainty has an echo. It fills silence until you realize the person who promised it to you has already stopped listening. The changes came slowly. At first it was work trips that stretched a little longer, then late dinners, forgotten calls, messages that came hours after I sent mine. I told myself it was stress. Everyone in finance worked insane hours. He'd tell me not to worry, brush a strand of hair from my face, kiss my forehead, and remind me we were building a future. That word used to comfort me. Us. I carried it like a charm around my neck until the day I realized he had stopped including me in it. By winter, his side of the closet smelled like hotel detergent more often than home. He had new shirts I'd never seen before and receipts from restaurants in neighborhoods we had never visited together. I found lipstick on one of his sleeves, once a pale coral shade that wasn't mine. I wanted to confront him, but the part of me that still believed in the rooftop lights told me it was nothing. Love doesn't always die in explosions. Sometimes it erodes grain by grain until the shape of it disappears while you're still standing there holding the pieces. Then came the morning everything cracked. It was a quiet Thursday, the kind that smells like coffee and fresh laundry. He had left early for a meeting. I was cleaning our bedroom, humming along to an old Norah Jones song playing from my phone. When I reached for the jewelry box on my dresser, the hum stopped. The box was open and the ring wasn't there. The indentation in the velvet looked like a ghost of something valuable that used to exist. I froze. My first thought was innocent. Maybe he took it to have it cleaned or resized. My second thought hit harder. He didn't believe in gestures like that anymore. I waited until he came home that night. He smelled faintly of whiskey and unfamiliar cologne. I asked where the ring was. He looked at me like he had to remember what I was talking about. Then he shrugged. "You never wear it anyway," he said, turning toward the kitchen. That was all. No explanation, no apology, just a sentence tossed over his shoulder as if it didn't hold years of promise behind it. I stood there, the air thick around me, realizing that indifference is quieter than anger, but it cuts deeper. Days passed. I tried to pretend things were normal, but silence has a way of echoing until it fills the room. Then one afternoon, while doing laundry, I reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt folded, small ink smudged from sweat. I flattened it against the dryer. The words came into focus. King's Pawn and Loan, diamond ring, appraised at $12,000. My stomach turned cold. My ring. The signature at the bottom was his. I sat on the floor, the hum of the dryer filling the space where my breath should have been. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My pulse slowed almost steady, as if my body understood something before my mind did. It wasn't rage that rose inside me. It was clarity. When he came home that night, I didn't confront him. I made dinner, pasta, salad, wine. I laughed in the right places when he talked about the office. I waited until the plates were empty, then asked if he had any money problems. He frowned, confused, then annoyed. "Why would you ask that?" he said. I reached into the drawer, slid the receipt across the table. He stared at it for half a second, long enough for the color to drain from his face before the smirk appeared. "You're overreacting," he said. "I'll buy you another one, something better." That sentence broke whatever illusion was left. I realized then that he hadn't pawned the ring because he needed money. He had pawned it because he could, because he believed he owned everything it represented. I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. "Okay," I said. That was the first lie I told him, after months of truth. He thought he had won the argument. He didn't know that while he smiled at his phone, I was already building an exit plan in my head. That night, after he fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. I started small checking bank accounts, old emails, business transfers. The glow of the screen painted the walls blue, and I remember thinking how strange it was that discovery could feel like peace. I downloaded statements, screenshots, copies of transactions, anything that would help me understand where our money had gone. By sunrise, I had a folder labeled Simply Proof. I called a lawyer that morning. Her name was Andrea Phillips, a woman my client had once recommended. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that sounded like it had seen worse stories and helped them end better. When I told her what I found, she said I did the right thing calling her first. For the next few weeks, I played my role. The devoted fiancé. I smiled when he bragged about work, laughed when he made empty jokes, and kissed him goodbye at the door. Each time the lock clicked behind him, I sat at my desk gathering more. Transfers, hidden accounts, deposits under false names. Andrea called it personal entertainment expenses. I called it the beginning of the end. By the time I knew where every dollar had gone, I wasn't shocked anymore. I was steady, the kind of steady that comes right before movement. Love had been the fairy lights on that rooftop. Reality was the pawn ticket sitting in my drawer. That night as he slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting each breath, letting the rhythm settle into resolve. Somewhere outside, the city was still awake, traffic lights blinking red and yellow, sirens fading in the distance. I wondered how many women were lying in their own darkness, realizing the person beside them wasn't who they thought. I turned my head toward the faint shape of him sleeping easily, unaware that the silence between us had become a wall. Forever wasn't a promise anymore. It was a question I would no longer ask, and when morning came, I was already halfway to answering it. Chapter 2: The Pawn Ticket. I woke up before the sun and watched the sky over Seattle move from slate to the color of weak coffee. The apartment was quiet in that way that makes every small sound feel amplified. The radiator clicked. A gull called somewhere above the alley. I poured water into the kettle and set my phone beside the sink. I did not open any messages. I did not open social media. I only opened the folder on my laptop that I had labeled Proof. The icon pulsed once like a heartbeat, and then the files were there. Bank statements, screenshots, notes I had typed while the house slept. I scrolled until I reached the pawn ticket. My name was nowhere on it. His signature sat at the bottom like a final shrug. I made a list in a notebook. Go to the shop, confirm the item, confirm the date, ask what happened after the holding period, keep voice steady, keep face neutral, smile if needed, leave if it hurts, breathe either way. Then I added one more line. Do not ask for what he should have given back himself. Traffic into Belltown crawled the way it always does when the city has not decided what kind of day it wants to be. I parked near a deli that sold bagels all day and walked the block to King's Pawn and Loan. The sign buzzed faintly. The door chimed when I pushed it open, and the smell of old metal and floor cleaner took me back to the thrift stores I used to explore with my mom. Behind the glass case stood a man with gray hair and a navy sweater that had seen 100 winters. He looked up, measured me the way shopkeepers do, and asked if I needed help. I told him I might. I placed the ticket on the glass and said I was trying to understand something that had gone missing from my life. He put on reading glasses and tilted the paper toward the light. He said the ring was nice. He said it had come in on a Tuesday. He said the seller looked like a man who did not want to talk. He flipped through a binder and told me it had been moved out of holding after the legal window passed and that the buyer paid in full. He said buyers who pay in full usually do not return items. I asked if he could tell me where it went. He said privacy laws kept him from giving names. He was not unkind about it. He offered a soft apology, the kind that sounds like a hand on your shoulder. I thanked him and walked to the door, then turned back as if I had forgotten gum or keys. I asked one last question. Did the buyer put it on in the store? He said yes. He said she did. He had said the word she without hesitation. Outside, the air felt colder than it had a minute ago. I stood with my hands in my pockets while a bus roared past, sending a curl of exhaust down the block. Then I went to the deli, bought a coffee I did not want, and sat by the window. I watched people move with that weekday urgency that sometimes looks like purpose and sometimes looks like escape. My reflection stared back at me, same woman, different eyes. I took out my notebook and wrote a single sentence. He did not sell a ring, he sold a promise. On my way back to the shop, I called Andrea. She said to bring her the copy of the ticket and anything else I had. She spoke in short sentences that sounded like a bridge over a river I had not known I was crossing. At Carter and Bloom, the bell chimed behind me, and my assistant Harper looked up from the polishing cloth. She asked if everything was okay, the way good people ask, leaving room for you to answer honestly or not at all. I said I needed to step out again after lunch and that the orders for Saturday would need an extra pair of hands. She nodded and said she could call her cousin if we were slammed. I thought about how many women support other women in 1,000 small ways that never make it into headlines. At noon, I drove to Andrea's office on 3rd Avenue, a space inside a building that used to be a bank. The lobby still had the vault door as decoration. It made me think about safes and locks and the strange comfort of heavy things. Andrea's assistant led me into a room with a long conference table and a view of the monorail. Andrea walked in with a legal pad and a pen that clicked softly. She asked me to start from the morning I opened the jewelry box. I told her everything from the missing ring to the laundry receipt to the pause in his face when he saw the ticket. She asked follow-up questions in that steady voice, then said we would need more documentation before she filed anything. She wanted a full credit history for the last year. She wanted proof of any transfers out of joint accounts. She wanted screen captures of messages if I had them. I told her I could get them. She said to keep calm when I did. People show their worst errors when they think they are safe. I left with a list and a folder where every page felt like a step in the direction of my own life. The afternoon light was flat and pale. I drove back to the shop and went straight to the back office. I pulled our shared statements from the filing cabinet and took photos of every page. I downloaded 3 months of transactions from the bank app. I marked each charge I did not recognize and wrote a simple note beside it. Restaurant, 2 dinners, not together, hotel, not our anniversary, transfer, new account ending in numbers I did not know. I created a timeline with dates and amounts. Patterns emerged the way bruises do, faint at first, then impossible to ignore. That evening, he texted that he would be late. I said dinner would wait. It did not. At 9, he came in with a smile bright enough to belong to a stranger. He asked how my day was and kissed the air near my cheek. I told him the shop was busy. I asked about the meeting. He said it was productive. He said his client finally understood the strategy. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and scrolled through his phone. I watched the reflection of the screen dance across the liquid. He did not notice. When he slept, I reached for his phone and paused. I am not a person who snoops. I am a person who trusts. I am also a person who learns. I entered the passcode he used for everything from luggage to the garage clicker. The phone opened, messages stacked along the screen like a deck of glossy cards. I scrolled until I found a thread pinned to the top with a peach emoji. The name read Madison. Messages said things that were meant to be secrets. He told her that I was busy with my store. He told her she was the risk that made him feel alive. He promised trips and weekends and forever, that word he once spent on me, as if it had no cost. I took pictures of everything. The hotel confirmation that used his business card. the reservation for a restaurant in Capitol Hill with a private booth, the note where he told her the ring suited her because she had the right kind of hands. I sent the file to my personal email and then to Andrea. I closed the phone and set it down, my breath steady as if I had finished a long run. In the morning, I called the bank and asked for a temporary hold on the joint credit line due to suspicious activity. The representative asked a series of questions and then said the hold would be in place by afternoon. I hung up and called the airline listed on the confirmation and reported the upcoming purchase as fraudulent. I used the calm voice women use when they have decided to move the earth 1 inch at a time. By lunch, I had canceled his weekend plans without raising my voice. When I told Andrea, she said we would file the preliminary motion the next day. She asked if the lease was in both names. I said no. The apartment was mine. He had moved in with promises about saving for a down payment together. She said that was good. She said to change the locks when I was ready. She said to keep my head. He noticed 2 days later at SeaTac when a clerk told him his card did not work. He called me from the terminal and demanded to know what was wrong with the account. I told him he should call his bank. He asked what I had done. I said I had done what I had to. He hung up with a noise that sounded like a door slamming into drywall. That night, he came home with his jaw set the way men wear armor when they realize that charm has stopped working. He asked why I would sabotage something that could be fixed. He asked if I understood how fragile his work relationships were. He asked if I had any idea how stress affects performance. He did not ask how I was sleeping or whether the house felt like a house anymore. I told him the accounts were being reviewed and that I had spoken to an attorney. He laughed without humor and said I was being dramatic. He said it like an accusation and a compliment in the same breath. I did not reply. I picked up a glass and put it in the sink. He went to shower. I took his briefcase to the kitchen table and opened it under the light. Inside, I found invoices, receipts, and an envelope from a hotel near Pike Place Market. There was a printed confirmation, 2 guests check in date king bed. The name on the second line was Madison Lane. I folded the paper and photographed it, then put it back exactly as I found it. When he came out of the bathroom, he asked if I still wanted to watch something. I said I was tired and went to bed. I lay on my back and listened to him move around the apartment. Keys on a dish, a cabinet closing, the sigh of a man who believed he would always be forgiven. Andrea filed the motion the next morning. The court granted a temporary freeze on joint assets by afternoon. The clerk who called to confirm sounded like someone who had walked other people through this hallway many times. She told me the order would show up in the banking system within 24 hours. I thanked her and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the solid weight of a decision settle into my bones. The next days existed in 2 lanes. In one, I opened the shop, met clients, measured wrists and fingers, and talked about stones. In the other, I documented saved, labeled, and built a case. Harper brought me sandwiches and would not leave until I had taken 3 bites. The women who came into the boutique touched the display pieces with reverence. One told me she was buying herself a ring because she had earned it. Another said she wanted earrings that felt like a doorway into a new room. I thought about how jewelry can be a ceremony even when no one else is invited. He tried charm again that weekend. He brought flowers I did not like and a bottle of wine we could not afford. He said we should go away for a couple of days and reconnect. He said work had been insane. He said stress makes people act out. He did not say I am sorry. I told him I had orders to fulfill and a deadline for a magazine feature. He rolled his eyes, the careless gesture of a man who resents a world that does not orbit him. He went out for a drive and stayed out late. I took a bath and let the water carry away the parts of me that always waited up. On Monday, Andrea called to say the bank had confirmed multiple transfers into a new personal account in his name. The amounts added up to a number that would satisfy a down payment. She said we could proceed with a full audit and a notice of separation when I was ready. She reminded me to keep documenting. I thanked her and then thanked the version of myself who had made that first call. That evening, I stood in front of our mantel and looked at the framed photo of us from the rooftop. Light wrapped around us like a stage set designed to flatter. I lifted the frame and held it until my arms felt heavy. Then I put it back and turned the photo face down. It made a small sound on the wood like a quiet period at the end of a sentence that had gone on too long. When he came home, he noticed the frame and tried a new tactic. He said he was worried about me. He said I did not seem like myself. He said therapy could help us both. He suggested a couples counselor his colleague had used. I thought about how men will try every door before they try honesty. I told him I had already chosen my next appointment. He asked with who. I said my lawyer. He stared at me like I had spoken a language he did not recognize. He slept on the couch that night. I closed the bedroom door with a click that sounded like a boundary finally respected. The apartment felt cooler and cleaner with fewer words hanging in the air. I slept without dreams. In the morning, I unlocked the shop and flipped the sign to open. A woman in a navy blazer walked in right at 10 and asked if I could design a ring that did not look like an apology. I told her yes. We talked about stones and meanings, about settings that hold and settings that release. She said she wanted something that looked like forward motion. I sketched a shape like a small flame, and she smiled in a way that made me think of the first day after a long illness. After she left, I stood in the window and watched the street move. For a brief second, I saw a woman walk past wearing a shape I recognized. A diamond on a left hand that caught the light the same way mine used to. My heart tightened and then loosened. Seattle is full of women with rings. I stepped away from the glass and went back to work. Near closing time, my phone buzzed with a message from Andrea. The judge had signed the follow-up order. She said we would have a hearing date soon. She said to expect pushback and to give none where it was not earned. I locked the door and counted the cash drawer, the bills crisp under my fingers. I set the alarm and turned off the lights. The last lamp over the center case glowed a moment longer, then clicked to dark. At home, I found the apartment empty and silent. A note sat on the counter in his handwriting, an arrangement of words that wanted to sound generous. He said he would be staying with a friend for a few days. He said we needed space. He said we would talk when emotions were not running high. I folded the paper once and dropped it into the trash can with the same calm I had used to carry my life through the last 2 weeks. I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back did not seem cruel or broken. She looked awake. I brushed my hair and turned off the bathroom light. In the bedroom, I opened the top drawer and placed the pawn ticket where the ring had once lived. The velvet indentation still held the ghost of a circle. I closed the drawer and let my hand rest on the wood. Then I picked up my notebook and wrote the last sentence of the day. Evidence is not just paper. Evidence is also the way the house exhales when the wrong person leaves. When I lay down, rain began to tap the window in a steady rhythm. The city hummed below, a low sound that felt like a current moving forward, whether any of us felt ready or not. I watched the ceiling until my eyes softened. The room felt new. The air felt clean. The question I had been carrying for weeks finally felt answerable. I did not need to say it out loud to know which direction the answer pointed. Chapter 3. The Affair Fund. I arrived at Andrea's office early the next morning with a folder tucked under my arm. The rain had not stopped since dawn, thin needles falling sideways against the car windows. When I stepped inside, the warmth smelled like coffee and printer ink. Andrea looked up from her desk and motioned for me to sit. "You did well," she said, flipping through the pages I had brought. "This gives us enough to move forward." She paused, studying one of the bank statements. "He's been moving money through a side account. We can track it. If he's redirected any business funds, that strengthens your case." I nodded, but my stomach was already a knot. "Do what you have to." She looked at me for a long second, her eyes sharp but kind. "Lila, from this point on, speak less to him, document everything, and don't warn him." I said I understood. I did. When I left the office, the clouds had cracked open just enough for a slice of sunlight to spill down on the sidewalk. I took it as a sign that maybe something inside me had started to shift too. That evening, Ryan came home humming. He smelled like expensive cologne and satisfaction. He opened a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses, and said we should celebrate. For what, I asked, not looking up from my laptop. "For us," he said. "I think we should go away for a while. Maybe Napa, just you and me." He smiled the way people smile when they're performing. I looked at him and said, "That sounds nice." Later that night, when he fell asleep on the couch, I opened his laptop. The screen came alive without a password. Emails, messages, a travel confirmation to San Diego in 2 weeks, 2 tickets, 2 names. Mine was not one of them. I forwarded it to Andrea. Within minutes, she replied with one word: "Perfect." The next morning, I called the credit card company and disputed the charge. The woman on the phone was polite, efficient, unaware she was erasing a piece of his plan. By the afternoon, the tickets were canceled. 2 days later, he called me from the airport, his voice sharp with panic. "They said my card's frozen." "What did you do, Lila?" I stirred my coffee slowly. Maybe talk to your bank, I said. Don't play games with me. I'm not, I said. But maybe you should stop playing with me. He hung up. That night, when he walked through the door, he was a storm contained inside a suit. His jaw was set, his hands trembling with quiet anger. You think you're clever, he said. You think you can humiliate me like this? I don't need to, I said. You're doing fine on your own. He stared at me, searching for the woman who used to defend him. He didn't find her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than shouting. Then he grabbed his keys and left again. The next day, Andrea filed for legal separation. She said we'd cite asset fraud and emotional distress. The motion would force a temporary freeze on everything he could touch. The weeks that followed felt like living in two worlds. During the day, I worked at the boutique, measuring rings, sketching designs, smiling at customers who told stories about anniversaries and promises kept. At night, I sat at my desk under a single lamp, going through documents highlighting details that proved betrayal can be a form of arithmetic. One Friday, Andrea called. We have a hearing date, she said, next Wednesday. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Be ready, she added. He'll try to look calm. They always do. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and bleach. The marble floors were slick, echoing with footsteps that all seemed to lead somewhere else. Ryan stood near the defense table, his suit pressed, his hair cut shorter than usual. Beside him, his attorney, a man named Keegan, flipped through papers with performative confidence. Andrea leaned toward me and whispered, "Let him think he's still in control." The hearing began. Keegan spoke first, calling our situation a misunderstanding. He said we'd had communication issues, that emotional conflict often leads to financial confusion. He used words like reconciliation and good faith. Andrea waited until he finished, then stood and walked to the center of the room. Her voice didn't rise, but it filled the space. My client's engagement ring was pawned without her knowledge. The proceeds were used to fund a personal relationship outside their partnership. We have bank records showing transfers from joint accounts into a private one. These funds financed travel, lodging, and gifts for a third party. We have screenshots of messages confirming the relationship. She turned a page. This isn't emotional confusion, it's financial misconduct. Ryan shifted in his seat. The color drained from his face, then returned in patches. Keegan started to object, but the judge held up a hand. Enough, he said. The room went quiet. The judge looked at me. Ms. Carter, do you wish to make a statement? I hesitated. Andrea's hand brushed mine in silent encouragement. I stood. I don't want to destroy anyone, I said. I just want to stop financing my own humiliation. The judge nodded slowly. He turned to Keegan. Provisional freeze remains. Hearing adjourned to next month. Silence in that courtroom felt louder than any victory cheer. Outside, the rain had stopped, but puddles mirrored the gray sky. Ryan tried to catch up to me at the top of the courthouse steps. You didn't have to do this, he said, his voice tight. I didn't. I said, you did. He looked away first. Madison stopped showing up at the hearings after that. I guess the glamour wore off when the money stopped moving. The following weeks passed in quiet rhythm. The shop stayed busy, and Harper handled most of the clients while I focused on new designs. I created a collection called the Phoenix line. Each piece was shaped from reclaimed gold, small flames rising in the pattern of wings. When I held one of the rings in my palm, it felt warm. Customers loved it. Some asked if there was a story behind it. I told them it was about transformation, about turning something ruined into something strong. At night, when the store was closed and the lights dimmed, I sometimes checked my phone out of habit. He still sent messages, half apologies, half accusations. You're destroying my life. You'll regret this. You'll never find someone like me. I never replied. One message came on a Sunday morning. It only said, I miss you. I stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. Missing someone doesn't erase what they did while you were looking the other way. Andrea called that afternoon to tell me the next hearing was confirmed. She said the judge would likely extend the freeze and that we'd push for final division once the investigation was complete. I thanked her and hung up. Later, I stood at the window of my apartment watching the city lights blink across Elliott Bay. The reflection in the glass didn't look like a woman seeking revenge. It looked like someone rebuilding her own gravity. The next morning, as I unlocked the shop, Harper handed me a small envelope that had arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph printed on glossy paper. A restaurant table, wine glasses, and in the center, a hand wearing a diamond ring I recognized instantly. My ring. For a long time, I stared at it, feeling something like disbelief and relief intertwine. The caption on the back said dinner with the best man in the world. It was tagged from Madison's account. She hadn't sent it to me directly. Someone else had, maybe by mistake, maybe not. I placed the photo in a drawer and closed it. The noise it made was sharp and satisfying. Later that day, I called Andrea and told her about it. She laughed softly. Poetic evidence, she said. We'll use it if we have to. That night, I walked down to the pier where the ferry horn echoed through the fog. The wind carried the scent of salt and something clean. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. I whispered into the open air, "You took the wrong woman's ring." Then I went home and slept without dreams, ready for whatever the next hearing would bring. Chapter 4. The Return Receipt. The next morning I woke before the alarm, the sky outside still a flat gray. The hearing was 2 days away. I brewed coffee but left it untouched. The apartment smelled like quiet and dust. I glanced at the photo frame lying face down on the mantel, the one that had stayed that way since the last time he left. It felt final now, like punctuation. When I reached the boutique, Harper was already unpacking a shipment. She smiled and asked if I wanted music. I said not today. My mind was already in that courtroom, walking through lines of evidence, faces, signatures, the slow unspooling of truth. 2 days later, I stood beside Andrea in front of the same oak table as before. Ryan sat at the opposite end with his attorney Keegan, who looked less confident now. The hearing room smelled like old paper and rain-soaked coats. The judge arrived, expression unreadable. Keegan spoke first, trying to argue that Ryan's actions were misguided, not malicious. Andrea let him finish before rising. My client was not misinformed, she said. She was deceived. The evidence is here. Every dollar moved, every message sent, every item pawned. There's no misunderstanding about intent. Ryan shifted in his seat but said nothing. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. I said no. There are moments when silence is the only statement worth making. The judge reviewed the file and then closed it. We'll issue a final ruling by next week, he said. In the meantime, all temporary orders remain. His gavel hit the wood softly. Hearing adjourned. Silence in that courtroom felt louder than any victory cheer. Outside, the rain had started again, fine and steady. I walked down the courthouse steps without looking back. Andrea caught up with me, her umbrella tilted to shield us both. That's the last major step, she said. He can't touch your assets. Once the ruling's signed, it's over. Over, I repeated. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth. She squeezed my arm lightly. You did everything right. Go live again. I nodded but didn't answer. Living again didn't sound simple. It sounded like starting from the dust left behind. A week later, the judgment arrived. Every joint asset was awarded to me. The court declared his transactions fraudulent. He was ordered to repay what he'd taken within 30 days. The number looked huge printed on that paper, but what it really bought was peace. That evening, while the city lights blinked through the rain, Ryan came to my door uninvited. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. He stood there looking smaller than I remembered. His shirt wrinkled, his hair grown out, eyes rimmed with fatigue. We need to talk, he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. He paced the living room like a man rehearsing a speech. I made mistakes, he said finally. But freezing the accounts like that was cruel. Cruel, I repeated, like selling a ring that wasn't yours to sell. He rubbed a hand across his face. You don't understand the pressure I was under. You were under Madison, I said before I could stop myself. He froze, shoulders tightening. Don't turn this into a joke. I'm not joking, I said. And I'm not turning it into anything. It already turned itself. He looked at me for a long time, the way people look at doors they know won't open. You'll regret this someday, he said quietly. I met his eyes. I already did. Once. He left without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment, a dull final sound that settled somewhere behind my ribs. 10 minutes later, Andrea called. The final order's filed, she said. He has no access to the accounts, no claim to the boutique, nothing. You're clear. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs its name quietly. The following days moved with strange lightness. Harper noticed it first. She said I smiled differently, less like I was pretending. I told her I was just tired, but the truth was the air itself felt less crowded. Ryan's lawyer called once asking to negotiate payment terms. Andrea handled it. I didn't want to hear his name anymore. A week after that, his mother stopped by the boutique, an older woman with kind eyes and a sad mouth. She looked at the displays, the rings, the pendants, all gleaming in the soft light. "He's lost everything," she said quietly. "He's desperate." I nodded. "That makes two of us once." She didn't argue. She only said, "You were good for him." Then she left, leaving behind the faint scent of lilac perfume. That night I stayed late at the studio, sketching designs for a new pendant. A tear-shaped outline formed under my pencil, soft at the edges, sharp at the tip. I called it The Lesson. It was inspired by receipts by loss, by the way truth bends but doesn't break. I molded the prototype from silver, pressed a faint pattern on the surface that resembled a folded piece of paper, a pawn ticket reimagined. When the first batch sold online, I watched the orders climb. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something steadier, proof that pain could be repurposed. Weeks turned into months. Ryan's name appeared in the paper, once attached to a failed business venture. Word spread that Madison had left him. Karma balanced the books the way no accountant ever could. He tried to call a few times. I let it ring until the sound became part of the air. He sent one email. It said he hoped we could find forgiveness someday. I closed it and archived it with everything else I no longer needed to keep. Spring returned to Seattle. The city smelled like wet leaves and new beginnings. One afternoon, as I was locking the boutique, Harper asked if I ever missed him. I thought about it longer than I expected. "I miss who I thought he was," I said. "But that person never existed." She smiled gently. "That's still progress." That evening, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window watching the light fade. The apartment felt quiet, but not empty. I put on music, the same song that had played the night he proposed, and listened without flinching. The notes still sounded beautiful. They just belonged to someone else now. I walked to the bedroom and opened the drawer where my jewelry box used to sit. Inside lay the pawn ticket edges, worn ink fading. I touched it once, then placed it back. Some ghosts don't need to be exorcised. They just need to be filed away. The next day, Andrea called with news. The court had approved the closure of all joint accounts. My name was the only one left on the business license. She congratulated me, but I could hear the fatigue in her voice too. Cases like mine, she said, were hard to win cleanly. I thanked her, hung up, and felt the full weight of freedom settle in. That night, rain started again, soft and steady. I turned off every light except one over the display cases. The jewelry gleamed like small planets caught in orbit. I walked between them slowly, fingertips grazing the glass. It occurred to me that survival doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, breath by breath, until one day you realize you're not counting anymore. He had pawned my ring to fund an affair. I had turned his betrayal into an empire. Chapter 5. The Proof, Not the Rage. A year passed before the past found its way back to me. It came one afternoon in early March when the first hint of spring light slipped through the boutique windows. Harper was rearranging the front display when a courier appeared with a small, unmarked package. The label carried only my name in neat block letters. No sender, no return address. I waited until the shop closed to open it. Inside was a white jewelry box from King's Pawn and Loan, the same place where my engagement ring had vanished. A folded note rested on top. "Found this in a batch of repossessed items. Thought you might want it back." The handwriting was unfamiliar. I stared at the ring under the studio lights. It shimmered like a ghost of another life. For a while I just held it, the metal cool against my palm. I could have sold it. I could have buried it. But neither felt right. Instead, I melted it down. The gold folded and softened under heat, taking on a new shape, one that belonged only to me. When the metal cooled, I engraved a single word across the surface: enough. That word didn't feel angry. It felt full. It felt like air after rain. Enough became the beginning of something new. I built a collection around it. Simple lines, quiet strength pieces that spoke without shouting. I called the brand Enough Jewelry. Every design carried its own scar, a tiny imperfection left on purpose, a reminder that beauty doesn't have to be perfect to last. Within months, orders started coming from women across the country. They wrote stories in the notes section of their orders. A teacher leaving a 20-year marriage. A nurse who quit a job where no one said thank you. A daughter who finally told her father no. Each piece I wrapped felt like a heartbeat, a small declaration that someone had decided they were done being hurt. One morning, a journalist from a local magazine visited the shop. She was young, enthusiastic, full of questions about design and branding. Halfway through the interview, she asked if the company had been born out of heartbreak. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from distance and peace. No, I said. It was inspired by recovery. She looked surprised, then wrote it down. That line became the headline when the article ran the following month. Boutique owner turns betrayal into brand built on resilience. For days, customers brought in copies for me to sign. They called the story empowering, I called it closure. And just when the past felt like a closed chapter, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end reminded me why closure matters. It was Ryan. His voice sounded smaller, stripped of the confidence that once filled every room. "You won, Lila," he said. Happy now, I let silence hang between us before answering. Winning was never the point. "Then what was proof?" I said quietly. "Not rage. Proof that I could build without you." He sighed, the sound rough, tired. "You'll always think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I just stopped thinking we were equal." He didn't reply. The line clicked dead, and the quiet that followed was the cleanest sound I had ever heard. Weeks passed. The business grew. Reporters started calling from other cities. Retailers wanted to carry the collection. Harper managed the new hires while I spent evenings sketching new designs. One of them was a ring, simple gold with a faint indentation running along the band, a small echo of what had once been lost. Sometimes women came into the store holding their own stories in their eyes. They would touch the display case and ask about the pendant. I always told them the truth. "It means knowing when to stop giving," I said. "It means realizing you can't pour from a cracked glass." Some nodded, some cried, all of them understood. The boutique became more than a business. It became a quiet gathering place for survivors of every kind. They didn't come to talk about revenge. They came to talk about beginning again. One evening, as the shop emptied and the last bit of daylight stretched across the floor, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I left one lamp burning over the display case where the first enough pendant sat, my original. I still polish it once a week, not to make it shine brighter, but to keep the surface warm. Behind the counter hung a framed photograph of the rooftop from that long-ago night, fairy lights suspended against the dark sky. Beneath it, I had written 4 words: "She believed then, built." I looked at it every night before leaving, not out of sentiment, but gratitude. The woman in that memory had trusted someone else to define forever. The woman locking the door now understood that forever was something you build yourself. The city outside was alive again, streetlights flickering on the hum of traffic rolling down the hill toward the bay. I stepped out and turned the key, the soft click of the lock sounding final and whole. If you have ever been betrayed, dismissed, or quietly replaced, let this story remind you that you don't need rage to rise. You only need proof. Tell me, what would your enough look like? Would you walk away quietly, rebuild, or redesign what broke you? Leave a comment below. I read every one. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It is reclaiming your worth and writing your own ending.